Welcome, Verena, to the World Vegan Travel Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Bridie.
So we're going to be talking about New York City. And even though you were not born in New York, you have definitely spent a lot of time there and are definitely an authority to talk about this topic, which is, why New York is such an awesome destination at all times of the year. So before we get into all of that, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the vegan travel space and your connection with New York?
Sure. So my name is Verena Erhart, and as Bridie already indicated, I was not born in New York. I was born in Austria, but I have lived in New York for almost 12 years now. It's always been my dream city, and I'm very glad to be here. And I still don't get bored. I have still not seen all the sights. This is, one of the things about New York. There's always new things to do and see, so you never run out of ideas. And I run vegan food tours here in New York. It's called Vegan Tours New York. So we run currently 3 different tours where we take visitors and locals on walks across the city, and we highlight various vegan restaurants there.
Great. For listeners who haven't listened to one of our previous episodes, Verena and I met for the first time when we went to Korea, and she was actually a guest on sort of like a reflection podcast that I'll link down in the show notes for you. At the time of recording this podcast, you just got back a couple of weeks ago, just like me, right? And you're over the jet lag?
Yes, finally over the jet lag. It took a good week for me. I kind of enjoy being jet lagged because you get up really early. And your day is pretty short, but you have a lot of days a time in the day when nobody else is awake. Kind of like the 5 a.m. club. I don't know if you know that book where, a lot of very high achievers get up super early. So I felt like, yay, I'm a high achiever, but I'm also super tired. Yeah.
It's good to be over the jet lag for sure. I agree with you. So New York, of course, it's a world-class city. Lots of people dream of coming to live there like yourself or coming to visit. But I think a lot of people might be put off at certain times of the year because the weather is pretty extreme in New York compared with, well, even here in Vancouver, I would say. Can you speak to that?
Yes, unfortunately, I have to agree with that. But what I like to say is that if the weather was perfect, like if the weather was like in Sydney, for example, even more people would want to live here and even more people would need apartments. So it would be even more expensive than it already is. So I think as a New Yorker or as a visitor to New York, you have to be a little bit hardcore. And it usually gets very cold in the winter, especially January, February can be very, very cold. And the summers can be very hot and humid. So it's not rare to have like 10 days in a row with like 35 plus degrees Celsius and a very high humidity. So like in the high 90s if you're in Fahrenheit, and the humidity is often around 90% or so. So you sometimes get out of the door and you feel like somebody's actually holding a blow dryer in your face because it's that warm. But having said that, it's still always a great place to visit. Some of my favorite seasons, if I would have to pick one, would be like late May, early June, or around this time of the year, like October is a really good time, October, November. But usually it gets a little bit colder now. Today, as you could tell, it's very warm. Today we have 18 degrees Celsius and 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Climate change doesn't miss New York either. So hard to tell. It can be warm any time of the year, basically.
Let's talk about things to do during that winter, because I know a lot of people would just be put off with the idea of going to New York in the winter time. I would disagree with that. There's no such thing as bad weather. It's just bad clothing. If you can get a really great coat, then it can be a really awesome experience. So how can people embrace that cooler time of year, whether it's late fall or during the winter time?
Sure. So, of course, before Christmas, you will see all the beautiful Christmas lights. There's Christmas markets around the city, and the decoration is just amazing. Like even just looking at shopping windows in stores like Saks Fifth Avenue, for example, or Bergdorf Goodman, they put so much effort into decorating with these windows. It's really incredible. While it gets very busy before Christmas, January and February usually have some of the best prices for hotels. So you will get really good deals on hotels. And also, Broadway shows are cheaper that time of the year. There's a thing called Broadway Week where often tickets are 2 for 1. That happens in January, February, and also again in September. So that's a good thing if you like theater and if you like to see live performances. And then there's a lot of outdoor activities, believe it or not, in the winter too. You can go ice skating in various places in the city, like, for example, the very famous Rockefeller Center rink, which is also, unfortunately, one of the smallest ice skating rinks in the city. Then there's a free ice skating rink in Bryant Park, and that also has a little holiday village built around it with various vendors, some of which also offer vegan food and vegan gifts. So that's a nice activity to do. There are other ice skating rinks, for example, in Central Park and also in Prospect Park. That I think is a really nice thing to do. If you want to go skiing, you can do that too, but you have to drive about 2.5 hours out of the city to do so. And you living close to Whistler and all these beautiful ski resorts, unfortunately, you cannot expect that here in New York, but it's still snow and there's slopes and there's ski lifts, so it's all right.
Yeah, I went to Quebec in February this year, and they have Carnival at that time of the year, and they have all of the free ice skating, and they have ice sculptures everywhere. I think they deliberately put it in like January, February, just because they already have lots of people coming to visit around the Christmas time. Let's put something in a place, in a time of year where it's not so busy. And I think that's really clever strategy, and it can be really, really magical. In Quebec City, anyway, everything's lit up for the festival. It's still a really nice atmosphere, even though it's not, you know, the holidays.
Yeah. And they have these canals that freeze, right? That you can also skate in. I've seen pictures of those.
In Ottawa, they have the longest skating rink in the world. I think it's either 9 or 11 kilometers long altogether. People ice skate to work, which is kind of a cool idea. But yeah, it's frozen from, well, I don't know exactly, but maybe December to February or March or something like that. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, really, really cool. Yay. Okay, great. What about the things that are happening in the May, June time?
So one of my favorite events in the city is called the 5-Borough Bike Tour. So it's a car-free bike day where you can rent a bike or go on your own bike, and it's 40 miles of car-free roads throughout the city. It's very similar to the marathon route, if somebody's familiar with that. It's like 30,000 people that go on this bike tour. It's not a race, so you can go at your own pace. There's different food stops and different refreshment stations. And it's just a great way of seeing neighborhoods of the city that you usually don't often get to.
I love that idea. That's really cool. It's like a guided tour just for the cost of a bike.
You do have to register for it, unfortunately, and you also have to pay for it. So it's not free, but it's maybe around $70 or so. So it's not too bad for a full day of biking. It's usually still pretty chilly in the morning when it starts, but then throughout the day, it warms up. Yeah, it's really nice. There's a similar thing like that if you do like biking that is actually free in the summertime, and it's called Summer Streets. And that is the first 3 weekends in August, and they block off Park Avenue between Brooklyn Bridge and 110th Street, I believe. And then you can just bike or run or rollerblade along Park Avenue. And it's just a very cool event too.
Did New Yorkers embrace that?
Yes, it's very popular. Yeah, very popular. Unfortunately, it's only 3 weekends a year, but I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I was so lucky. We were in Paris. I think it was September. We didn't even know when we arrived, but it was a Sunday, and it was actually the one Sunday where Paris was like car free, and then very limited cars in other areas. And it was awesome. The atmosphere was great, and it really did get me thinking, oh my goodness, how awesome would this be every week or all the time? Just living in cities would just be so much more enjoyable.
There's some places like Bogota, for example, does that every week. That must be really cool.
Are there any other cool events or festivals or recommendations that you would like to share?
Yeah, so also in the spring, we have a Cherry Blossom Festival at the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. We have like 40 different cherry blossom trees. When they come in bloom, it's really, really beautiful. And you don't necessarily have to go to Japan to admire those. It's always a beautiful place to visit the botanical gardens, but I think the cherry blossom is in particular beautiful.
What about culture, cultural events? Are there any particular events that people might like to time their visit for in New York?
There's always an abundance of cultural events in the city, of course. So we have the Metropolitan Opera, which starts its season in September, and it's world renowned and a wonderful place to visit. You can get very cheap tickets to it, actually, if you don't mind standing or sitting a little bit further in the back. Especially also before Christmas, there's a dance performance called the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, and they do amazing dance performances. That unfortunately only happens at that time of the year. During the summer, we do have a lot of free outdoor activities that take place. So there's, for example, Broadway performances, or like glimpses of Broadway performances, I should say, in Bryant Park, where they recite different musicals. There's free concerts throughout the city. We do have some free outdoor venues, like the Bandshell in Prospect Park or the Bandshell in Central Park, where there's both free and paid concerts in these venues.
What about going a little bit further afield, like outside of New York City proper? You've talked about the skiing opportunities. That's super cool. But are there other things that, maybe for people who have been to New York a few times before, but might like to get out of the city a little bit? Can you recommend some places
for that?
Sure.
So one of the most popular places for New Yorkers to go to is the Hudson Valley. It's about 2 hours north of the city. You could either ride the train or a bus, or you can rent a car and get there. There's towns such as New Paltz or Woodstock that are very nice and very hippie, and they have lots of great vegan food there. There's wineries and breweries in that area, and really, really good hiking and a lot of wildlife, surprisingly. If you're really lucky, you might see a black bear, depending on how your opinion is about snakes. If you're lucky, then you see a rattlesnake even, like we've seen those. It's just a very nice way of getting out of the city. In those areas, there's a bunch of animal sanctuaries you can visit. You can either visit them just on a tour, or you can visit them and volunteer for a day, for example. There's the Catskills Animal Sanctuary, and then there's the Woodstock Animal Sanctuary. And then that one is not in New York, but in New Jersey, there's a sanctuary called Tamerlane Sanctuary as well. And some of these actually also offer the opportunity to stay overnight, like Catskills does and Tamerlane does. So that's another opportunity to spend even more time outdoors and with the animals and just, connecting with nature.
I was really surprised when we were in Korea together and I was talking to you about what you do at the weekends, and I was quite surprised that you actually do go out of the city and do a day of hiking there.
Yeah. And in the summer, we go to the beach a lot. Like, you can take the subway to the beach even, or a train, like a suburban train, and you end up in a pretty decent beach, and it's all free. I mean, the train you have to pay for, obviously, but the beach themselves most of them are free. Let's put it this way.
Okay. What about comedy? Because I know New York has an incredible comedy scene.
Yes. So we have plenty of comedy clubs in the city. There's even a comedy festival happening now in November. It's starting next week, I believe. The good thing about comedy is that it's a lot more affordable than Broadway shows, for example. You would usually pay anywhere from nothing to maybe $20 of an entrance fee. And that often includes like a 2-drink minimum or a certain amount of money you have to spend. But it's generally speaking a very affordable and fun evening. And you never know who's going to show up. You might go to a comedy club and expect nobody, or a not known comedian, let's put it this way. And then all of a sudden, somebody like Jerry Seinfeld might walk on the stage just because they feel like doing an impromptu performance that night. So you can get very lucky if you go to comedy shows. I do have one of my tour guides, actually. She's just starting out as a comedian, and she's very good. You can follow her. Her name is Diana Fogel. She does a bunch of comedy shows in a city as well.
Something that you mentioned to me that sounds really fun is a vegan jazz club. Can you tell us
that
about
opened
that?
sometime last year. It's called Ornithology Jazz Club, and it's in Bushwick, which generally is a very vegan-friendly area with lots of restaurants and lots of beautiful street art and lots of cool bars. And one of them is a vegan jazz club that usually hosts different food vendors. So it's not one set menu, but there's different pop-ups, and it gives these food vendors an opportunity to test the market and see how people respond to their food.
Really cool. I really like the sound of that very much. We've talked a lot about active activities. I know you're a very active person, Verena, and ways that we can be active in so many different ways and enjoy New York City or the surrounds at the same time. Do you have any other recommendations?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that there's really cool outdoor yoga happening throughout the city in the summertime. So for summer solstice, there's an event called Solstice in Times Square. So they block off multiple sections of Times Square and build little yoga stages. And then throughout the day, you can participate in yoga sessions. They start at 7 in the morning and last until 6 at night. And it's all free. Often there's, free giveaways to like yoga mats and snacks. And it's just a very interesting experience to be doing this really quiet activity in Times Square, which is one of the loudest areas in the city. Also, it's one of the places that many New Yorkers try to avoid as much as they can because it's so busy and because it's so popular with tourists. But going to the solstice in Times Square is one exception where we do go to Times Square. And that only happens once a year, unfortunately. But throughout the summer, there's yoga twice a week in Bryant Park. That is also a really nice experience. You're on the lawn and again, you're surrounded by the city, but you could totally zoom out and enjoy your yoga practice.
I'm just imagining that a visitor to New York, maybe they can time the visit to New York for some of these things that if they're particularly interesting. But as you say, there are so many incredible things going on, I'm sure, every night in New York. What is a good way to kind of work out what is going on in New York in a given time? Do you have any recommendations for platforms or websites that will help us to find these events?
There's Time Out New York, which is unfortunately not as good as it used to be before the pandemic. And then there's sites just as the Infatuation. They post a lot of events. There's New York Magazine is very active at posting events. The New York Times does post a calendar of events. And if you are looking for a particular band, for example, I suggest you sign up for a website called Bands in Town. They give you alerts when a certain band is coming to a city you're either living in or you want to visit. In New York is also the website of Madison Square Garden has like the major events, and we'll also show you some smaller concerts that are happening.
Thanks for those recommendations. So we've talked about a lot of great events in New York, and we all know that New York has an abundance of incredible vegan restaurants. And I know people can visit some really awesome places on your tours, and they should definitely check up and sign up for that, because personally, I cannot think of anything better than spending the morning wandering around restaurants, eating, tasting different food at different restaurants with you or with your guides on an organized tour where I don't need to think about anything, and then maybe follow up in the afternoon with like a bike ride or something like that. So if you have some of your favorite vegan restaurant recommendations, given the fact that New York is such a multicultural place and so enormous.
So let's maybe start in the morning. There's a small local chain called Gregory's Coffee. Aside from coffee, they offer really good vegan breakfast items, such as a vegan burrito or a vegan croissant with egg and Beyond sausage in it. For those who like it a little bit on the sweeter side, there's usually a zucchini loaf and some granola. And they have locations across the city. So if you just, put in Gregory's Coffee, you will find it. One of my very, very favorite things to eat in the city, and we also visit that on our Brooklyn tour, is called Terms of Endearment. It's a vegan pastry shop, and they make the most amazing vegan bacon, egg, and cheese. So it's a croissant filled with just egg, their homemade creme fraiche, some vegan cheese and vegan bacon, and it just blows everybody away. Like, I've had people on my tour that were not vegan and they could not believe that this was an actual vegan sandwich. Again, if you don't like the savory side, they do have amazing sweet pastries as well. Unfortunately, they don't sell the croissants plain, so you have to get the croissants as, you know, one of their sandwiches. But they do have pain au chocolat or almond croissants if you like that as well. Another place I really love, it's called Spicy Moon. It's a vegan Sichuan restaurant, so Southern Chinese cuisine with a little bit of a kick. They use a lot of Sichuan peppers, so it gives your tongue this slight numbness feeling, but it's a beautiful taste. They have 2 locations. One is in the East Village and one is in the West Village. I highly recommend that, especially if you're in a small group, because then you can just order multiple items because it's all family style. 2 other places I would like to mention. One is right off Times Square. It's called Vegan on the Fly. So if you feel like a quick meal or even something you would take back to your hotel, they have really good vegan gyros and also a vegan Philly cheesesteak, vegan burgers. But the gyros is my favorite. I've convinced many people of their food and everybody loves to go back. Another restaurant that I really enjoy is called Ras Plant-Based. It's an Ethiopian restaurant in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. It's all vegan too. An amazing interpretation of Ethiopian food.
I really love hearing personal or locals recommendations, because I think a lot of us hear about certain restaurants in New York in the press and they might disregard other ones or just hone in on those ones. But really, there are just so many amazing ones. So thank you so much for those recommendations, Verena. I'm curious about your tours. Like, how can people book onto them? Because like I said earlier, a vegan food tour, a city food tour, and I've actually written a couple of blog posts about this. Vegan city food tours are a really great way to sample lots of different restaurants in a short amount of time, because the tour guide or the tour company, they have these arrangements with the restaurants so that, you know, you can just have a little serving platter or something like that. So I absolutely love vegan city food tours. So how do people book? Are there public ones? Do you need to like take over a whole group and do a custom thing? Like, how does that all work? Can people join in the day before? Can you just really talk people through how they might book a vegan
Generally,
tours in
our
New York?
tours are all public, and they mostly take place on weekends. We do have a breakfast tour that is currently taking place Thursday mornings. And then we do have our East Village and Lower East Side tour on Saturdays. Our Brooklyn tour is on Sundays. And they could just go to vegantoursny.com and book a tour there. If you would like to have a tour at a different date, you could just email us and we can totally arrange private tours at any given date or time, basically. But for now, the weekends are when we offer our public tours.
So actually you could do a different area of New York on a different day.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. And what are your future plans for vegan tours in New York?
I'm actually in the process of putting together a few international trips and national trips also. Like, for example, an overnight stay at one of the sanctuaries around the city with some volunteer work and some hiking, as we've talked about in our Korea podcast, possibly a trip to Korea. And I am organizing a trip also to Colombia, Austria, and Germany, which is where I'm from. For Vegan Tours New York, we hope to add more departures throughout the week, since, you know, demand is growing, so we are able to do that. I hope to one day do this really full time and just focus on that. That would be really, really nice.
Verena, how can people keep in touch with you and learn about all of the new exciting stuff that you've got coming up?
So the most active channel we're on is Instagram, so it would be Vegan Tours NY. You can also always send us an email to eat@vegantoursny.com. You can follow us on Facebook, also Vegan Tours NY. And I'm also happy to offer your listeners a discount to one of the future tours they will take. If you just put in World Vegan Travel in the promo code section of the booking window on our website, it will give you a 20% off.
Wow, thank you. That's really generous. Thank you so much, Verena, for all of this information and for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.